So you know the flow. I'm going to go through that now. Watch that video first. We'll help you go through the lab. So I'm going to go over these first 2, 3, 4 objectives. These last 2 are going to be covered in a different video. So once you are comfortable, okay, I can't get it to move. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I would do it again, but I'm sick of repeating myself, so we'll just have a little humor here. So this is just a fun little far side here. How easy it is to get some chicken hearts. Not as easy to get some human hearts for donations. Okay, so this is a picture of the heart. Again, you need to look at the one that you will be dealing with in lab. You need to go through that video. But what you need to get out of this one is the order that blood flow travels through the heart and whether the blood is oxygenated or deoxygenated. And deoxygenated means it's going to be low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. When I say oxygenated, I mean it's going to be high in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide. And so you will notice on the right side here, this is called the pulmonary pump because it is going to deliver blood to the lungs. So pulmonary meaning lungs. So this blood is going to be coming back from the body and it's going to be deoxygenated. So the body's taken out the oxygen that it needs and it's put in carbon dioxide to get rid of that. So this is the pulmonary. The right side is called the pulmonary pump. On the left side, we have the left side of the heart, which is called a systemic pump because it's going to pump oxygenated blood out to the whole system or the whole body. So when the blood comes back from the lungs, it is oxygenated. And so it's going to be the red in color. And just as a side note, when your blood is deoxygenated, it is not really blue. If you look on your arms and you look at the blood vessels, what you're looking at is veins there, and you may say, well, it looks blue. That's just how the light reflects off it. It's actually really a dark maroon. So next time you donate blood or have to give blood for a test, they're taking deoxygenated blood out of you, you can see that color. But we just use the blue because it's easier to distinguish between the red and the blue besides red and maroon, which would be harder to do. Okay, so I'm going to start here and I'm going to go through and I recommend that you write these down in order. So you need to know the order that blood flow travels and you need to know whether it's oxygenated or deoxygenated. It's called the circulatory system because if you're a blood cell, you start in one spot, and depending on how fast your heart is beating and blood is moving, you will end up in the same spot again, like a circle. So we're going to start at blood coming back from the body. It's going to travel up the inferior vena cava from your torso and your legs and to the superior vena cava from your arms and your head. This blood is deoxygenated, again, because it's coming back from the body. So our goal here is to take this blood and get it to the lungs. So we need some pressure to do that. So it's going to dump itself into the right atrium. We're then going to go through the first valve. Valves exist between chambers of the heart and between chambers in blood vessels. So this is called the tricuspid valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle. From there, the ventricle is going to contract. We're going to go through another valve called the pulmonary valve or the pulmonary semilunar valve. Out that valve into what is called the pulmonary artery. Now, most arteries contain oxygenated blood, but by definition, arteries take blood away from the heart. So this is one of the 2 exceptions to the artery has red blood or oxygenated blood. It has deoxygenated blood. It's going away from the heart, and then it's going to branch, and then it's going to head to the left lung and the right lung. At the lungs, what's going to happen, and we're going to go into more detail on this in the respiratory system, is the CO2 from the blood is going to diffuse into the lungs, and then you're going to breathe it out. And the oxygen that you've breathed into your lungs is then going to diffuse from your lungs into your blood vessels. So at this point, we have oxygenated the blood. Okay, that was the goal of the right side of the heart. We are now going to send it back to the left side of the heart. Now, some people ask, well, why can't it just go from the lungs right to the rest of the body? To move, blood has to have pressure. And so the right side generates just enough pressure to get it to the lungs and to get it back. We don't want a lot of pressure going to the lungs because the lungs have these little structures called alveoli that are very, very thin. And so if you had too much pressure, you would actually burst those alveoli. So we don't have enough pressure in the lungs to suddenly send the blood to the whole body. So what we're going to do is come back to the left side of the heart, and then it's going to generate the pressure that is needed for the blood to go throughout the body. All right, so we're in the lungs and we now have oxygenated blood, red in this case. It's going to come back from each of the lungs through the pulmonary veins. And there are 4 pulmonary veins, 2 on this side and 2 over here. The blood is now oxygenated. They're going to dump, all 4 of them are going to dump the blood back into the left atrium. We're going to go through another valve. This right here uses the term mitral valve, but you also need to know the term bicuspid valve, and that is used in the other video. We're going to come through here into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is then going to pump blood out the aortic semilunar valve, out the aorta, to the whole body. And then you've got these branches that you're going to learn about in lab that are going to spread the blood throughout the body. These are going to take the oxygenated blood to the arms and to the head, and then you'll have what's called the descending aorta, which you can't see here, and then the branches off that will take it to the torso, and then it will go to the legs all the way throughout the body. Again, at the body, what's going to happen at the cells? Those cells need the oxygen, so oxygen is going to diffuse from the blood into the cells. And the cells, in using the oxygen, have made CO2. So CO2, carbon dioxide, is going to diffuse from the cells into the blood. You now have deoxygenated blood, which will now come back to the heart through the superior and inferior vena cava, and then start over again. It's like the circle of life, Hakuna Matata. So that is circulation through the heart. So if I give you a location in the heart, you should be able to tell me whether that blood is oxygenated or deoxygenated, and you should be able to tell me where it goes next. So if I say the right atrium pumps blood into what chamber, your answer would be right ventricle. If I said the left atrium pumps blood through what valve, your answer would be the mitral or the bicuspid valve. All right, so I know it sounds like I went through that quickly, but when you watch these, you should be rewinding it, taking notes, rewinding it again until you have good notes and that you have something that you can understand. You should be writing this down. You should not depend just on listening to this video thinking that you're going to remember it. You're not. So write down, you can use crayons. Use blue crayons for deoxygenated, red crayons for oxygenated. Okay, next. Okay, so the heart is a muscle, and it's similar to your skeletal muscle, the muscles we talked about earlier in the semester. It has actin and myosin. It needs calcium. It has similarities, but there are a couple differences. And one of the differences is your heart muscle cannot stop beating. So when your biceps gets tired from doing something, you kind of just stop. Well, your heart muscle can't do that or else you die. So that would not be a good thing. So one of the things that it needs is it needs a constant blood supply, a constant blood supply. And so what's going to supply the heart with its blood? These are called coronary arteries. Okay, here's the word coronary. Coronary arteries. Coronary arteries are going to supply the heart with its blood. So every time in between heartbeats, the blood goes to the heart. So you can see here, right here, these coronary arteries actually attach to that aorta. And so when the heart beats, it sends blood out the aorta, which will then go to the whole body. In between beats, blood will flow from the aorta into these coronary arteries. So what heart disease is when someone starts to get a buildup of plaque in these coronary arteries. And that can happen, that happens over time, over years. And then when a person has a heart attack, what happens is that plaque can break off and then get stuck in one of these coronary arteries. And what that means is if it gets stuck, let's say it gets stuck here, and this is actually known as the widowmaker, which means if you have a heart attack here, the death rate is pretty high. So if a piece of that plaque breaks off and gets stuck here, what it means is this whole area of the heart suddenly is not getting any oxygen or any blood. If it doesn't do that, it's going to start to die very quickly. And that's when you get the symptoms of a heart attack, the chest pain and so on. We're probably going to watch a video. I'm going to give you a link to a video to watch of what a heart attack looks like. So that's what the coronary arteries do. Okay, they're obviously very important. Okay, the heart, another difference that heart muscle has is that it has its own conduction system. So if, I don't watch scary movies, but you see scary movies where, you know, they rip open their chest and they pull out the heart and the heart's still beating. That actually would be true. So your heart has its own conduction system. It doesn't need the nervous system to make it contract. Now, it's going to use the nervous system to control how much it contracts, but it has its own conduction system. Each heart cell has its own beat. And so the conduction system is going to control the heart muscle. It's going to control the order in which heart cells beat. So the first part of the conduction system, you're going to need to know this for lab 2, is called the SA node. And that is the pacemaker of the heart. So while each cell has its own beat, the SA node beats faster than them, and heart cells are connected to each other. So what happens to one heart cell is then transferred to another heart cell that's connected to, and then another heart cell that it's connected to. So the SA node is going to set the rhythm because it beats faster than all the other cells. It's like the pacemaker. Well, that's what it is. That's what it's called. But like if you think about a pacer in a race, they are the ones that's going to set the rhythm. And the SA node does that. The SA node then sends signals to the atrium, and then all the atrial cells are going to contract together, and that's going to push blood down from the atrium to the ventricles. That electrical signal then is going to come to what's called the AV node, and that's going to send the signal. That's going to send the signal, start the signal down the ventricles. So we go from the AV node down to what is called the AV bundle. And that bundle is then going to branch into what is called the left bundle branch and the right bundle branch. And what this will do will send the signal down the heart muscle, and then it will send it back up the ventricles through what are called Purkinje fibers. So when the heart contracts, when the atrium contracts, you're going to see this in the next couple videos, they're going to get smaller, and that's going to push blood down. But what we want is we want the ventricles to push blood up, either through the aorta or through the pulmonary arteries. So that signal is going to go down those bundle branches, left and right, spread out through the Purkinje fibers, and then push blood out into the appropriate, correct blood vessel. Okay. So it goes SA node, out to the atrium, to the AV node, the bundle, AV bundle, branches into the left and right bundle branch. Those branch even more into what are called Purkinje fibers, spreading the impulse throughout the heart. Okay, try it that way. Okay, so when these cells contract, okay, when they contract, they generate electricity. Okay, they generate electricity, and we can measure that electricity. Remember we talked about action potentials and the movement of ions. That's what's happening here. When the heart cells contract, they're having an action potential, and ions are moving. That means electricity, and we can measure that electricity. So this is an EKG. Okay, this is an EKG. Each of these waves represents some electrical activity going on in the heart. So this P wave, what would happen is the SA node would fire here, and then the impulse would be passed through the atrium. So what this represents, the P wave, is when the atrial cells are all contracting. And so the P wave represents the atrium contracting, or more technically, the atrium depolarizing. And that depolarization word, if you go back to the action potentials, remember depolarization, repolarization. So the atrium are going to contract. We're going to measure that electricity. They're then going to push blood down. So we're going to have this little delay where there isn't electrical activity. And then what's going to happen is the blood will then be in the ventricles, and then we will see all these fibers I've talked about, Purkinje fibers and heart muscle cells contracting, and we get what's called the QRS complex, which is actually 3 waves, but we're going to make it one big wave. And what the QRS complex represents is the ventricles contracting. So the ventricles will contract and move blood up. So this is the ventricle contracting, or ventricular depolarization. Okay? The electricity generated by the ventricles when they are contracting. Then we'll see a slight delay here, and then we get what's called the T wave. The T wave is the ventricles relaxing or repolarizing. So in order to be able to contract again, they have to relax. So they're going to contract, we get the QRS, then they're going to relax. We're going to have the movement of ions again to get them to relax. that's going to be the T wave. So some people, if you're thinking, you're like, okay, this is the atrium contracting, this is the ventricles contracting, this is the ventricles relaxing. What are we missing? We're missing the atrium relaxing, and that's going to be buried in this QRS complex. So don't worry about that. If I ask you what the QRS complex is, your answer is the ventricles depolarizing or the ventricles contracting. Okay, so that is the basic EKG. Make sure you know what each of those represent. You will be tested on it both in lecture and in lab. Okay, these two will be talked about in the next video. So we'll get to that later. All right, thank you. Bye.